Understanding hearing will change everything about how you make and experience music. This talk will review some of the key components of the anatomy of the hearing system, as well as some of the well-known perceptual phenomena that can inform hearing protection and music production. The ear is a complex sensory organ comprised of three major sections: the outer ear, which is the visible section, the middle ear, which helps transduce acoustic vibrations from one medium to another, and the inner ear, which converts vibrations to nervous information. The pinna reflects and refracts sounds in certain frequency ranges into the ear canal. For this demonstration, take off your headphones if you're using them and play sounds out of your speakers. Computer speakers will work just fine. Cup your hands and hold them such that they extend your pinna. You'll likely hear a change in the quality of the sound coming from your speakers. Now, cup your hands such that they face backwards, negating the shape of your pinna. How did this change the quality of the sound? The tympanic membrane, or eardrum, moves sympathetically with changes in air pressure. When the pressure increases, it moves in a little bit, and when it decreases, it moves out a little bit. In the middle ear, we have the ossicles. These are the smallest bones in the human body. They are made up of the malleus, incus, and stapes, or the hammer, anvil, and stirrup, respectively. Through a simple mechanical system made up of these small bones, sound pressure changes that vibrate the tympanic membrane are concentrated on a small area at the entrance of the inner ear. The inner ear is comprised of two systems, the vestibular system and the cochlea. The three tubes of the vestibular system help us keep our balance and spatial orientation relative to gravity. The cochlea translates sound pressure oscillations between 20 and 20,000 Hz into nerve transmissions that our brain interpret as sound. For many of these images we use when examining the cochlea, we draw it not as its natural snail-like shape, but unrolled and flattened to make it easier to see. The stapes is connected to the oval window. When it moves in and out, it pushes and pulls on fluids around the basilar membrane. The membrane resonates at different frequencies along its length. Those resonances turn into nerve firings, which let our brain know that vibrations at those specific frequencies are present. Let's take a look at a short animation that reviews what we have explored so far. As you can see in the animation, the cochlea functions kind of like a prism or spectrogram in that it decomposes complex signals into simple component parts. Our human spectral analyzer has some physical limitations. Let's try a short experiment using nerves spread out over the area of our forearm as a metaphor related to how the cochlea may be limited. For this experiment, you'll need 2 chopsticks or dull pencils. If you can get a family member to join in the experiment, even better. On your own, hold the chopsticks in one hand such that the tips are 10 to 15 centimeters apart. You want to gently touch them to your forearm of the other hand. You should be able to feel the 2 distinct points of contact. Now move them closer together and touch again. And again. Note the distance between the tips when you can no longer feel 2 distinct points of contact. If you have a family member helping, have them test your arm with your eyes closed, then switch roles. Pause the video now to do the test and return once you have completed it. This is a cross-section of the cochlea as we've been looking at it so far. The basilar membrane is on the bottom of this image, and the organ of Corti is on top. When the basilar membrane resonates, it causes these tiny little hair cells to bend and flex, which in turn causes nerves to fire. These nerves relay to the brain what frequencies are present in the sound stimulus. At this time, we cannot regrow damaged hair cells. This is why hearing protection is so important for those of us who make a living with our ears. So far, we have discussed the anatomy of the ear and how it physically transduces sound pressure variations into nerve firings. The next section addresses perception of sound. Frequencies are perceived when enough nerves pick up vibrations in a section of the basilar membrane, but also timing of nerve firings help us perceive sound, especially in lower frequencies. This is in part why lower frequencies are generally still perceived once hearing loss affects most other frequencies. Since the higher frequency sensing of the cochlea has a smaller surface area, therefore less redundant nerves associated with those frequencies, minor damage that is uniform across the cochlea will reduce sensitivity to high frequencies in particular. Benj Canters will go into more detail on hearing preservation during his presentation next week. As it turns out, we have a wider range of sensitivity to the frequencies that happen to be some of the most important for speech comprehension. This graph plots red curves of equal loudness against a backdrop of different intensity levels. The lowest red curve represents the threshold of audibility, while the highest curve shows the threshold of sensation or pain. We are going to try to avoid that top curve as much as possible. Let's listen to some experiments where we explore the bottom curve. In this auditory example, you will hear a short tone burst that is repeated several times, reducing in amplitude each time. Please count how many repetitions you hear of each stimulus. There will be 3 different bursts, one low frequency, one high frequency, and one in the middle. How many times did you hear the sounds echo? Did you hear the low frequency tone less than the high and middle frequencies? If so, that makes sense. We're less sensitive to low amplitude, low frequency sounds. Here are several SBL levels with reference sound descriptions as examples. Please note that some things that we experience in music technology are firmly in the risk range. Since many of us work with headphones, it may be good to know roughly at what levels we are experiencing. It's probably safe to say that if you are playing music loud enough to drown out city traffic, you're putting your hearing at risk. Speaking of drowning out noise, let's try that listening experiment again, but this time we're playing the tone bursts against a background of noise. How did your echo count change, if at all? If we play that background noise at a high enough level, you'll start to hear fewer and fewer of those echoes. Now, if we replace that broadband noise with a steady tone, we'll change the bottom level of our threshold of hearing, but now it's only in a specific range of frequency. Let's play that echo test again, this time against a background of a steady middle frequency tone. How did your echo counts change with this one? Did you find that the low and high frequency echo counts were more or less the same, but the middle frequency only had a few echoes that you could hear? Now, imagine you were listening to more complex waves. As you remember from the sound video, complex waves are made up of simple waves. If one simple wave can mask another, you can be assured that complex waves can mask each other too. This is why when professional mixers want to increase the audibility of a certain sound in a mix, they might not necessarily turn up that sound, but turn down other sounds or the frequency components within them that are getting in the way of that quieter sound. So far, we have demonstrated loudness as a function of frequency and amplitude. There's another function of loudness, at least in the context of transients and noise. That is duration. Let's listen to this example of 3 noise bursts, each of a different duration. A click or a noise burst of a very short duration does not sound as loud as the same noise at the same amplitude for a slightly longer duration. Lots of compression and gated reverb on drums will effectively make the transients or noise section of the drum hit last longer, therefore sound louder. That said, there's a limit to this duration effect. Once you reach 100 milliseconds or so, the longer noise durations do not necessarily make it sound louder. As we heard with frequency masking, low-intensity sounds are not heard in the context of high-intensity sounds. With frequency masking, the effect is constant in time, but we can also experience temporal masking just before and right after an intense sound is produced. This next auditory example will play a tone alternated with a noise burst. The noise burst will start below the threshold of hearing and get increasingly more intense, then fade back out again. The tone burst will stay at the same amplitude throughout. Please pay close attention to the tone. Many of you will notice that the tone starts to sound like it's playing longer and longer until it fuses into a continuous tone, even though the tone never plays while the noise is playing. If that fusion did not work for you or did not blow your mind, let's play another example. This time, the frequency of the tone burst is modulated by a low-frequency oscillator, or LFO. Again, the noise burst will interrupt the tone so it never plays continuously. Please listen carefully to that tone, especially when the noise is at its loudest. Most, if not all of you, heard the chopped up tone fuse into a continuous sweeping tone. This continuity effect is used all the time in audio processing to reduce the amount of data needed to make convincing playback of sound. For example, only about 25% of the information in my voice recording is needed to create a realistic playback. Most of the 75% isn't even noticed when it's missing, as it's part of the audio signal that would have been masked either in frequency or time. Before moving on to the next section, take note of any new ideas you want to explore further. Now that you know a little more about loudness perception and masking, how might this inform your work in sound design? What would you do differently when mixing to make sure that listeners can hear your music as loudly and clearly as possible without necessarily increasing amplitude? There are several aspects of the hearing system that we have not covered in this video. You can read more about them on How Stuff Works. Continuity of tone is just one of many auditory illusions that may be of interest to you. You can read and hear more examples on Wikipedia. As mentioned before, Benj Cantors will discuss hearing preservation in more detail next week. In the meantime, you can check out his organization's webpage, heartomorrow.org.